I'm Nick Hernandez, and you're listening to the Positivity Matters podcast. Today, I have Dick Dienstbier, who is Professor Emeritus of Psychology from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, as my guest. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Nick.
I have much appreciation for your work and much appreciation for your willingness to speak at some of the events that we've organized in the past, from the Summit Happiness Lincoln to a community conversation. I believe we went with calling it Wither Desire. So there's been several of these things over the years, but here we are again, getting a restart. And since last we've engaged, I see that you've come out with a book, Food for Thought, Nutrition and the Aging Brain. I initially stumbled across your work on physiological toughness, and that resulted in the book Building Resistance to Stress and Aging, the Toughness Model. So we can start wherever you'd like, but I'm guessing that the two might be connected.
Indeed,
Fill
they
us
are.
in.
Well, that earlier book that was published in 2015 on toughness covered the aspects of how exercise and cognitive challenge and even things like meditation influenced neurochemistry and neural structure in ways that had impacts on both cognition and things like mood and uh, dispositions to experience depression and things like that. And after I was done with that book and those analyses, I often, especially in teaching OLLI classes and so forth, people would say, "Yeah, but tell me about food. How does nutrition impact those things? Surely it must play a role." And I, in order to answer those sorts of questions, started looking at the research on nutrition and especially impacts on aging brain, aging cognitive capacities, and thought, okay, this is looking kind of somewhat interesting. Well, I was in the midst of trying to write another book, one that focused on meditation, and was rapidly losing interest in that. So even though there was a publisher sort of waiting for that book on meditation, I said, hey, I could give you an even better book. And after some wobbling, there was agreement, and I started to dive into nutrition. As you probably know, Nick, I am not a nutritionist. It was a bit presumptuous of me to undertake this.
I think that's a example of a curious, inquisitive intellect.
I guess so.
So what did you find in this inquiry?
Well, I found some things that were sort of surprising. One of the things I was quite interested in was the controversial literature on alcohol, wine, and brain, and so forth, which I got kind of interested in, and um, wrote a couple of chapters on that to try to ferret through some of these contradictory studies and determine what it is that led to the contradictions. Um, Other areas that were, I thought, particularly interesting were, tea and coffee and their impacts on chemicals, their delivery, I should say, of chemicals called polyphenols that have big impacts on brain development and circulation. Some things like cacao, cocoa, the refined version of that term, have both immediate impacts. So if you drink some high polyphenol chocolate drink right now, in 15 minutes or so, it'll actually change circulation levels in your brain. But similarly, or perhaps more importantly, long-term consumption, meaning, drinking a chocolate drink of this high polyphenol content every day, will change the way in which your brain structure looks um, when scanned with MRIs and so on and so forth. To the good, I might add. So chocolate is just one of those things that's just really good for you. Besides all that, what's particularly interesting are the way nutrients interact with each other. In diet programs like the Mediterranean diet or the Mind diet, where quite apparently individual nutrients may have some small effects, but the interaction of nutrients with each other is much, much larger. Another tack that I haven't written much about, but that I'm interested in, is we've got some new Alzheimer's drugs that have been approved by Food and Drug Administration and so forth in the last year or two. There's a couple of new ones. They're god awful expensive. The level of impact that they have of sort of slowing by about 25% the progression of Alzheimer's once it has begun is small compared to some of the impacts we get from various forms of nutrition. In other words, you can do a hell of a lot more for yourself in terms of preventing cognitive decline, even into dementia, by being conscientious about food rather than spending $5,000 a month for a new drug that'll slow progression by 20%.
That is fascinating. I am thinking about toughness, and I have a quote that I'd like to read to you that is something that you wrote, and that is, once toughness begins to develop the experience of enhanced mental and physical energy and of sustained mental abilities allows us to optimistically approach life's various challenges. Confronting those challenges toughens us even more. Thus, once we begin to toughen, we experience an upward spiral where toughness leads to choices that in turn continue to toughen us. Are you saying chocolate can be a part of that?
Yeah, actually, Nick, I am. Um, and it's one of those things. If you had a tendency to be religious, you'd say there's proof that there's a God if chocolate actually is good for you.
I love it.
That quote that you started with, though, yeah, I stand really solidly behind that. The more you can do things to get the brain working more effectively, the more you have a feeling of having enough mental energy to really confront challenges and take on new things, like you're doing right now with this project of starting to think about ways to spread information to other people. Um, Once you get going on stuff like that, you really do build energy capacity and capacity of the brain to generate neurotransmitters and so forth. And that gives you a different feeling of potential success, of optimism when you encounter new tasks and problems and so forth. So it makes it easier to engage those things. And if you engage them more, then you do tend to build more capacity.
More engagement, more capacity. I'm all for both of those. So you mentioned alcohol and wine.
Mm-hmm.
What are the positives? What are the negatives?
Oh, red wine particularly has a bunch of chemicals that are particularly good for the brain. You can get the same thing from grapes because most of these come from the this grape skins, and that's why red wine, of course, is initially fermented with the skins in the grape juice, um, is 8 or 10 times more dense with these important chemicals than white wine is. So there are some nutrients in red wine that are particularly good for you. But again, you don't have to drink white red wine to get them. On the other hand, there's some evidence that alcohol levels are not at all good for the brain. And some of the same research that uses plasma analyses of blood plasma to look at the metabolites of red wine versus the metabolites of alcohol find that there's a negative correlation the metabolites of alcohol with brain fog in the very same people in which there's a positive correlation between the metabolites of red wine and brain fog. So that's not definitive research in the sense that there are still differences that show up in the research literature. But to simplify that somewhat, alcohol is not alcohol is not alcohol in the sense that if it's in whiskey, there are vastly different implications than if it's in beer than if it's in wine, because each of those beverages is carrying other things along.
So maybe eat the grapes, but possibly pass on the wine.
Indeed, that would work pretty well.
And you still got your
And
chocolate.
that's right. Yes, and maybe there is some further evidence of celestial intervention in the wines.
Are there any other so the Mediterranean diet, grapes, chocolate, are there any
Berries,
other berries? Okay.
berries, but especially blueberries are awfully rich in some of these polyphenols. You know, I'm thinking about one of the studies that was done in Holland, I believe, in which for a period of about a year, the researchers were buying people in two different randomly assigned groups fruit. And one of the groups was getting fruit that is particularly rich in polyphenols. And the other was getting fruit that was not deficient, but not nearly as rich. And over the course of a year or two, cognitive tests before and after and show dramatic improvements in the cognitive scores on various IQ tests and that sort of thing. For the folks who are eating the fruit that is richer in the polyphenols than the folks who are eating the fruit that is less rich. And by the way, very similar random assignment condition studies have been done with chocolate that's rich in polyphenols, usually in the form of a drink, versus identical tasting chocolate drink, very low, with similar results that cognitive scores of people as they age, of course, tend to slightly fall, but not for the folks with the richer chocolate drink, not for the folks with richer fruit.
Fascinating. How does activities that build up toughness and nutrition and these foods that are conducive to better brain health, what would a day look like of for someone who's conscientious about both nutrition and toughness possibly look like?
Oh, wow. Um, to begin with, I want to compliment you that this kind of question is really important. You know, and to some extent, it boils down to can you substitute activities that build brain capacity, neurochemistry, structures, and so on. Can you substitute those sorts of activities for, say, good nutrition? Do you have to worry about not eating quite so many uh, cinnamon rolls or fatty steak if you exercise regularly? On the other hand, if you watch your diet really carefully and conscientiously engage with the Mediterranean diet on a every day, um, well, hell, do you then have to go run every day, or work out, or lift weights, or can these things substitute for each other? The answer is generally no. They may all do somewhat the same things. Um, there are various foods that improve, for example, the quantity of a neurotrophin, which is like a growth hormone that works in the brain. There are foods that increase neurotrophins, especially the very most important one called brain-derived neurotrophin. And exercise does the same thing. Physical exercise, both in the short term, an hour after you've been exercising, your BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor levels are increased, just as they are after you have some chocolate. And so we have, on the one hand, certain kinds of nutrition, on the other hand, certain kinds of behavior, resulting in the same neurochemical changes which do wonderful things for the brain. But they seem to be additive. If you do both the exercise and the eating of the chocolate, you get a much bigger boost than if you do either one. So the fact that they're doing the same thing doesn't mean really that they're good substitutes for each other. You can get benefits from each. So what does a typical day look like? Well, I I'd start with an egg. If I weren't exercising first, I'd start with an egg because it's got some things like spermidine that are awfully good for the brain. I mean, the research is really solid. Um, and you don't get it from very many other sources except for wheat germ. Um, but generally, it's one of those things that when it's low, cognitive decline tends to accelerate. So I'd start with some protein in that form, and think about maximizing fruit and vegetables and whole grains, which are the sort of foundation keys of things like the Mediterranean diet. Um, and again, research is just extraordinarily solid. Um, Not just cross-sectional research where you compare people who eat a lot of tomatoes with a lot of people who don't. People who eat a lot of vegetables generally don't. All that research always shows positive impacts from good diet, positive brain impacts, positive cognitive impacts. But smarter people tend to have better diets. They choose better diet. So these correlational studies that show that eating more veggies is positively correlated with being smarter, they don't prove it. You really have to have the random assignment to condition sort of, and those are much more expensive. They're harder to do across real long time span because some of these cross-sectional studies look at people's diets across as much as 2 decades and how that relates to cognitive stuff. To digress just a little bit, with some of the best studies on booze and brain have been done in England um, across a 20-year span. And by the way, that particular research in England tends to show that the more you drink, the harm you do to the brain. Um, and it's one of those things that makes you begin to wonder right away what's going on, because we have a bunch of American studies that don't show similar things. Um, This is where the interaction between things gets interesting because the B vitamins generally are really, really good for the brain. And alcohol tends to inhibit the body's absorption of the B vitamins. So if you drink a lot of alcohol on a regular basis, you're not absorbing B vitamins very well, and that's not doing any favors for the brain because again, B vitamins are amongst the most important things for maintaining brain integrity. So what's that got to do with English studies of beer drinkers versus American studies of wine drinkers? Well, right away you see there's a problem with the beer versus wine business. But more than that, in the United States, by mandate, by law, all our flour is fortified with B vitamins. In Britain, it is not. And so there's a vast difference in the amount of B vitamins in the bodies of Brits versus Americans, typically, and not everybody, but this means that alcohol may not do nearly as much harm to an American who's plenty of B vitamins from diet versus a British person who doesn't have plenty of B vitamins. Then alcohol, is taking away a scarce substance in Britain, and in the States, alcohol is taking away a much more plentiful substance. So it's probably not going to do as much damage. These interactions are fascinating.
To be or not to be? Be.
Yes, and you can probably get enough B vitamins from a diet in this country, but it sure doesn't hurt to take a multivitamin too. In fact, you being a well-read guy probably have encountered in the last 6 months popular media announcements that finally taking a multivitamin has shown positive impacts on the brain and on cognition. And the multivitamin was Centrum Silver that is very popular and available. But the silver indicates that it's formulated for older people.
You're the bearer of good news. I had not heard that, but I've been taking a multivitamin, so thank you.
Oh, sure. And of course, multis are stuffed with high levels of B's, so you get the supplement there as well as in your diet.
All right. Now, when it comes to toughness, you mentioned exercise, and it sounds like doing things that are deliberately challenging, such as setting goals maybe that are derived from your own interests, might be along those lines. So tell me more. What builds toughness, and maybe, well, let's start with, in your own words rather than mine, what is toughness, physiological toughness?
Well, it's having the brain neurochemistry that keeps the brain functioning at an optimal level. So we talk about neurotransmitters a lot in even in common science literature. For example, that dopamine is considered to be neurotransmitter that you stimulate with a lot of street drugs, and is when you have big dopamine floods as a result of taking drugs that perhaps shouldn't. Um, you get this big surge of pleasure, which tends to be very addictive over long term. And that serotonin is a neurotransmitter associated with depression, that there are low levels of serotonin in people who tend to be depressed. Antidepressant meds boost serotonin levels when we were with marginal success, but never mind. So having the brain's ability to generate its neurotransmitter is one of the things that physiologically is a sign of uh, but the more that various neural circuits are stimulated by, say, taking on cognitive challenges, doing this sort of thing you were just talking about, the more as those neurons are activated and reactivated, they release those neurotrophens, those growth hormones, that when they flood into the brain, cause expansion of neural networks, expansion of circulatory networks. And so doing things like exercise or cognitive stimulation or even activities that we think of as affectionate, socializing with other people, which tends to be pretty stimulating. All these things cause the release of the neurotrophins as well, and thus the growth and maintenance of brain. You know, a brain like mine in a person who is older is declining in sheer volume at about 1% a year. I can stop that slide by being conscientious about these activities that we think of as toughening. Even, you know, you're interested in dancing, and I think of Tai Chi as somewhat like a kind of a dance. There's some real good research done in China with Tai Chi and its ability to stop brain shrinkage in those people who, for a year, in the Tai Chi condition, versus for doing other things. Um, Again, that sort of Tai Chi, the dance that you're interested in, and things like that that involve simultaneous coordination by brain with physical activity seem to be especially good at building, maintaining toughness.
I was thinking about that with partner dance in particular. There's a lot of the elements that are foundational to the model of human flourishing that I'm putting forward through Positivity Matters. So that is health, aesthetic experience, play, positive emotion, yes saying, which is a way of talking about values and goals, life, the web of life, and our connectedness to that, information and the pursuit of knowledge, friendship, and engagement or flow. It's been my experience that few activities have brought together the pursuit and deepening of all of those foundations of human flourishing for me as partner dance. And I'm sure that every person in pursuing their own passions can find all of those things as well. But that one, for me in particular, has been the exemplar, and especially in terms of flow and that just being absorbed in experience. How about for you? What have been some of the most engaging activities when you look back or look forward when you that seem to conduce to your well-being?
Well, first, let me respond to what you just said. I think you're right on. I think that when you think of the interaction that is social and even potentially affectionate, as well as the coordination of activities that the brain is being asked to do an awful lot in dance, and there's the physical side of it as well. I think you're onto something really important. a lot of folks, when they think similar thoughts, think about sports, and this gets into you're asking about my personal, over the years, for years and years and years, I was a handball player, and almost always doubles, because of various reasons, but not entirely. But there's interaction with a partner in the sense that I'm going after the ball, you stay away from it. We're not going to both hit at the same ball at the same time if we're partners. Um, there's all the mental activity of moving to the right place, doing the right things physically with the body, which of course is all driven by the brain. Um, I don't know if I've ever said, but digress and say I don't like dislike the term muscle memory, as if there is some sort of non-brain involvement in those things that we do physically when we claim we do them with muscle memory, almost with no thought. But the brain's driving everything. The brain is it. It's who we are. And there's no such thing as the muscles taken over and learning their path and then doing it. Anyway, so for me, that kind of sport, whether it be tennis or this modern paddleball, which or
Pickleball?
pickleball as well. All these things, in some sense, they're similar, and I've said to a number of partners in handball, particularly, it's like a dance, and you got to dance together to play this sport, or else it doesn't work. And if you watch doubles tennis or something like that, um, the coaches instruct you on how to dance. If your partner's moving this way, then you should be moving that way. It's very social, very demanding of a lot of coordination from the brain as well as the physicals.
Well, thank you for sharing a personal anecdote. So we have put these examples of activities that might deepen our toughness. For me, partner dance in particular, West Coast swing, and for yourself, handball. From
But that's
a
in the past, Nick. That's in the past.
well,
My
let's
artificial joints don't want too much handball now.
all right, we'll step away from uh direct involvement and look at it from the perspective of a researcher, perhaps. Say we wanted to study how much various activities develop toughness in people, and we're going to compare partner dance. We'll just go with West Coast swing to doubles handball, perhaps. If
Okay.
how would a researcher compare such a thing? How is toughness measured, and maybe how would one compare these two things against a control group in the background that's not doing anything to deepen their toughness intentionally?
Wow. This is a tough research project because we can't just look at a population of people and say, okay, we're going to randomly assign you to becoming to play handball or to dance. There's a willingness issue there. I think instead of comparing the two, we might just say, all right, let's undertake a study of the partner dance thing. And the way in which that would typically be done by a psychologist would be to put out the ad in the newspaper for folks who would like to sign up for a research study, perhaps with a little payment involved that is going to involve teaching and training in partner dance. You got a whole bunch of folks then hopefully, who sign up for this and they'd like to be in such a study. And then you say, okay, that's the good news. We're going to teach everybody here partner dance, but here's the bad news. Half of you are going to be randomly assigned to a waiting list. And we'll have some other things going on for you so that we keep you interested and together and so forth. But half of you are going to undertake partner dance, 6 months of training. The other half are engaged in some hopefully interesting activity hooked into the research. And at the end of 6 months, we're going to switch. And the people who are in partner dance, of course, we're not going to stop you from dancing, but we're going to stop the training. We're going to stop the regular engagement with other folks. And we do the switch. And at the beginning of each of those 6 months periods, both groups get some cognitive tests that test their ability to focus, concentration, and solve problems. And if we had a whole bunch of money, we have everybody head into the MRI for some brain scans, particularly of the areas around the hippocampus and the frontal lobes. And we have all that data solidly recorded. Perhaps we do a little bit of, see, I'm dreaming now, analyses of plasma to look at especially levels of BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is most important of all the brain neurotrophins. And even look at cerebral spinal fluid to look at the levels of some of the neurotransmitters. And then we're going to do all that again at the end of 6 months. And then there'll be a washout period after the first 6 months of one group doing more sedentary things, one group. A washout period of maybe a month where neither activities. And then the two groups switch. And with both before the switch, the cognitive test, the MRI scans, the whole bit, and the after as well. And then we do the grueling statistical work afterwards, ferret all this out. Each person is their own control in the sense that they've had the ongoing partner dance thing and so forth. And we're assuming that the partner dance is not going to result in long-term changes, or at least not really long-term, so that a month washout is enough to see people kind of returning back to some sort of toughness normal. So that we're going to have to have a grant for this, because this is a long study. To keep people hooked into it, we may actually have to pay them. May have to pay them a substantial amount, and to handle the 35 or 40 people we're going to initially sign into each of those two conditions. Although with everybody being their own control, we might be able to get away with 20 to 30 in each of the conditions. So we're going to need some help with people coordinating this research and being there to teach partner dance and so forth. Some of that help's going to be paid. I think we're going to probably need $50,000-$60,000 at least. That's not counting the rental for the MRI stuff, which tends.
Where do we sign up for this? I want to get paid to learn how to dance better.
Where indeed to sign up for this. Well, National Institutes of Mental Health might be interested. The National Science Foundation might be interested, especially if we can if one of our dependent measures tie this into some disease and um, that the immune system profits from toughening activities. And so we might throw out that for the next year after the study looks like it formally ends, we have follow-ups on the amount of COVID people contracted, um, or flu, or colds, or some other more physiological indicators of immune system health. So that would entice some of these granting agents to see this as worth
Well, I hope they're listening or will be listening.
it. Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you for humoring that line of inquiry here. And now, so looking into the future, what do you see coming next in your intellectual endeavors? Or if someone were to pick up the work that you've done, where would you like to see them take it?
I have a friend in Denmark. It's just a guy who picked up that Toughness book and got really captivated by it. He's work has mostly been in physiological impacts on brain, and he and I talked for a couple of years about turning the Toughness book into a popular book, into a book that people would read without saying, "Oh, I'm getting a headache here." Um, that's not going to happen, but it's one of those things that I wish would, because I'd like to have the ideas reach more people, um, for the potential good that having those ideas does for people. So that's one direction. But I'm beginning to note, as I work on changing the nutrition book into a couple of different research articles, in which they're both more updated and more technical for journal publication. I'm beginning to notice some of the cognitive features of aging that I don't love to see. That after loss of focus, why was I doing this? The sort of a why did I walk into this room? What am I here to get? Thing that we all experience from time to time, but we experience a lot more of as we. Uh, so I'm seeing those things and thinking, okay, um, maybe another scholarly book is not there. Um, I'll write a novel instead. How's that?
That works.
Or try to. Everybody wants to write the great novel. So there's no mystery in that. And I think everyone who retires especially says, well, one of the things I'll do is I'll write the great play or the great novel, or I'll humor my inner child.
One of the areas of popular translation of physiological toughness that jumps out to me is a lot looking at stress. I think I've seen mixed popular accounts about stress, and it seems like half of the experts that you hear from are saying, watch out for stress, manage your stress, avoid stress. And then there's a much smaller group that seems to be highlighting, well, there can be positive effects of stress. And yours is one that really jumps out Another is an author by the name of Kelly McGonigal. And I've heard maybe this word wouldn't be used in a popular account, but I've heard eustress as maybe a positive form of stress.
Mhm.
But that's, yeah, this looking at stress is, and that there can be some benefit. And, anyways, that's one of the things that jumps out at me in terms of writing the popular book that might be something that would or could be dwelt on. What do you think? What Tell us about stress and toughness.
Well, I like to draw a line between stress and challenge, um, because each builds, each taps into a different system of arousal in the body, and and this gets very much into definitional. For me, stress includes the idea of distress, of being uncomfortable, of being in a situation where the anticipation is of failure rather than on the other hand, challenge could be exactly the same ongoing activities, and those activities um, could be experienced as likely to result in some good positive results and so forth. If you were training some new people in partner dance, some of them are thinking to themselves, "Oh, crap! I'm going to step on toes. I'm going to be really crappy at this, like I've been crappy at so many other things." And this is a person experiencing stress. They're parasympathetic nervous. They're not the parasympathetic nervous. They're their pituitary adrenal corticals arousal is high. Their cortisol levels go up. They don't feel good about what they're doing, and they're just anticipating nasty stuff. That is not much of doesn't have much of an upside, period. Just doesn't. Couple right next to them that's anticipating this is going to be fun. I'm going to learn something new. It's going to be great. Sure, it's going to be difficult. Sure, it's going to be challenging. Sure, I might start sweating when I don't want. But but I see this as something I want to do. I want to learn. I'm feeling positive about this. This a little bit of cortisol might get generated in this person, but mostly the arousal that they're experiencing, the fuel that is energizing their body, is coming from adrenaline, not cortisol. And the recovery from these two things is going to be very different. The first couple is going to get out and sit down in a chair and say, "Oh crap, I'm so glad that's over." And it's going to take me 2 hours to recover from this. And the other people are going to recover almost instantly and have a much more enjoyable time. So I don't like the term eustress because I think it misleads people into thinking that stress, as I've just been talking about it, the negative side of it, is actually ever good for you. I think you can live a very happy, tough, stress-free life, but it's going to be full of challenge.
Thank you for the distinctions.
And having said all that, confronting some real stressors, especially when you're growing up, can lead to lessons on how to solve stressful problems and so forth that will be good for you for the rest of life. So, although we don't see um, stress as a positive very much, it can provide a learning experience. So now you know how to cope with even worse things that come along. There's a learning component. Um, so physiologically, stress is not going to be good for you very often, but psychologically, there are definitely times when you're going to learn some stuff. And those lessons are going to maybe save your butt later on in life.
So one term that I've heard that might be the differentiator between something being perceived as stressful and something being challenging is mindset. Is is that the what is the difference between the person that processes the experience as stressful and the person that for whom it's challenging? What makes the difference?
Part of it is just being aware of what you've just said, just coming to realize that the way in which you understand the situation you're in is going to have an impact on the outcome. You know, it is Pollyannish to say all you have to do is have a positive view of everything. Think positive, think success, and you're going to succeed, and everything's going to work. Well, there's a certain amount of bullshit in that to be sure, but there's also a certain amount of truth. And if you can, once understanding that the way in which you think about the situation you're in is going to have an impact on the kind of arousal you experience, it's going to have an impact on the way in which your brain functions, so that it's not going to work as well, especially if you become self-preoccupied. You know, if you're in a situation and you're saying to yourself, oh my God, if I don't pass this test, I'm going to get this lousy and grade, and getting into medical school is going to be something. Oh, crap. You know, this, this is just scaring the pants off me. Once, once you begin to be sort of self-preoccupied, it's really hard for consciousness to let that go, you know, and then thinking about, oh, geez, what's going to happen to me takes over a lot of brain space, a lot of what we say on a computer, a lot of RAM is preoccupied with that. So part of what we're talking about is just willing a more positive attitude. How do you do that? Oh crap! So now we're going down a really tough and one that I'm certainly not going to be expert on, but learning coping techniques, psychological coping techniques, not just physical coping techniques, um, helps one to keep positive, to be optimistic. And then um, you can get into these problem areas of life without becoming, without attention being hijacked by self preoccupation. Spend all your mental energy on solving problems rather than on trying to keep yourself from falling apart.
Well, I think I'll stick to my hypothesis that positivity matters, but I think you've convinced me that toughness matters more.
Oh, 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 I don't know. I don't know, Nick. Maybe you don't want to go quite that far down that path.
Maybe they can interact in a dance and create a
There
virtuous
you,
upward spiral.
there you go. There you go. I'm with you there.
Professor Richard Dienstbier, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Positivity Matters podcast.